So my co-host and I, Grant, were pretty big advocates of the Charlotte Hornets drafting Scoot Henderson. And while neither of us are out on Scoot Henderson, we both fell in love with Brandon Miller last season. That was just, I shouldn't say I've never done an about face more quickly, but it was just most of the time when I watched him, I just came away thinking, oh, this guy has more of the it factor than I really thought. And even experts seem to portray coming out of the draft. So I have a twofold question. What impressed you or surprised you most about what he did as a rookie?
It was his willingness to be vocal. That was my thing. Like, he would tell people, get back. This dude, where LaMelo Ball is a little bit more laid back, this dude wants to win at all costs. He is a jerk. He is absolutely that kind of guy where, like, his mentality is, yo, I want to cut you. He's old school. And you can see why, like, Michael Jordan basically was attracted to this dude and zagged when everybody thought he should zig with Scoot Henderson. I am not out on Scoot Henderson either. Initially, I was all on the Scoot wagon. And then I started really looking at the film for Brandon Miller. And I think we had this conversation last year where it was, I thought at the minimum, Brandon Miller was going to be Keegan Murray. And then you started talking to Cliff. Then people started talking Cliff. Cliff started throwing out the Tracy McGrady comparisons. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Ooh.
Yeah. Like, that's when it really started changing for me. Is when people started throwing out the Tracy comparisons, and people really psyched about that dude in that building early. So, like,
I don't know that I must have missed that. And like, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm curious as to whether he'll ever be the same playmaker that Tracy McGrady could be. But like,
he doesn't have the athleticism. He doesn't have.
Yeah, but that's like, like, now that I'm thinking about it in my head and visualizing, like, that's a pretty good, less athletic Tracy McGrady. Okay, fine. He seems like he might be a little bit craftier. I mean, one of the things that impressed him, or especially on defense, that might have been the thing that stood out to me. I thought he did a good job getting to his mid-range game. He was better there than I thought. I think he shot like 47% on pull-up twos, which for a rookie is like, insane. I would say that's, yeah. But like the defense from him, and it's just like, even when he's not on the ball, like the ball denial, like it's just, oh, there's Brandon Miller. Like, his dude didn't get the ball because he refused to let him even have it. Man, I'm going to like laser into that Tracy. I might clip this and have to like make that a YouTube clip. That is a shout out Steve Clifford for that comp.
Yeah. Like Cliff came up with that comp, and it like, I didn't see it initially, but then you start seeing it, and you start, like you said, the playmaking is the only thing that he's short on, but I trust that Charles Lee is going to get that out of him. I thought there were those that compared him to Tatum. I don't necessarily see it, but I understand.
Because Brandon Miller would get minutes for Team USA, right?
Brandon Miller might be a better defender than Jason Tatum. Might be. And I don't want the Celtics fans all in my mentions thinking about like no. Like, Brandon Miller might
not a describe on Twitter, Celtics fans.
Jeez. But at the same point, like, Brandon Miller is a killer. Brandon Miller is, and if the reason that they do end up trading LaMelo Ball is because Brandon Miller, it basically becomes Highlander and is, again, isn't that there can be only one thing, then I get it. But that dude is a killer. That dude might end up being the de facto leader of this Hornets group by the end of this season. And there's already kind of established leader positions with Miles Bridges, who we'll get into later.
So what is one thing, I guess we touched on it a little bit, that you'll be looking to see from Brandon Miller, though, in year two? Aside from, I think the obvious thing is like, okay, well, what does it look like when he plays more with Mark Williams and LaMelo Ball?
I want to see like what he does with added strength. I thought he finished pretty decent at the rim last year. If he gets any sort of added strength, people are getting dunked on pretty regularly because he did pretty well. Like, the athleticism, it's not Tracy McGrady, but it surprised me because I thought he was he was closer to Chris Middleton than Tracy McGrady. It turns out I was wrong. He's closer to Tracy McGrady than Chris Middleton. I think like muscle watch with him is going to be very, very intriguing. Like, what does he do with some added bulk? What does he do? Because the one game he did in Summer League, and I know we can't take much from Summer League, that release got quicker. That's the one thing. Like, if you go back and look at the one game he played in Summer League, you just look at that release. that release looks ridiculously quicker than it was last year and just as deadly. And if that's the case, that man is going to be shooting a lot more threes. And maybe, just maybe, like, depending on how this season goes, the Hornets have 2 All-Stars.
And do you think having the added strength and the ability to, in theory, finish better, and I'm not, again, I was impressed with his mid-range game, but it did have the tendency to become a little bit of a crutch at points. Is that something that could help him then get to the basket more?
I think it'll help him get to the basket, but I think it also helps him. I think it'll help his mid-range game too, because I do think that it does. Like, we kind of ignore how much strength it takes to stop on a dime, get your body right, and finish possibly over a defender in the mid-range.
Especially if you're not generating a ton of separation while you're
exactly.
doing it.
And that's the other thing. Like, and you talk about generating separation. There's stuff with his handle that he can clean up that he may have cleaned up. But he's good enough to where if he never cleans up the handle, he'll still be fringe all NBA. He cleans up the handle. Sky is quite literally the limit for that kid.
The other thing that I kind of just thought of, and it's a thing, is that this team is better suited. It would have been this case last year, but when they're healthy, but the team is better suited to have improved spacing around him. And that just makes his job easier no matter what level he is trying to score from.
It's funny you mention that, because this might be like last year, funnily, like, and this is, and if you ever listen to what Plotkin and Schnall said when they made that trade to basically clear the decks, they didn't know what they were doing. They just wanted to clear the deck. And you added a Davis Bertans, you added a Seth Curry, you added Trey Mann, and those guys started hitting threes, and you started seeing a lot more spacing for these guys. And it, like, Brandon Miller became super effective. It was then where you started seeing the 20, the 30-point games from him, is when they started adding the spacing. If you add a lot more legitimate NBA talent to that roster, I think you're going to have, I do think that there's a world where Brandon Miller averages 25, 27. And I do think it could, I'm not saying 50, 40, 90, but if it's 45, 39, 85, I wouldn't be surprised.
So I will say one of the things that impressed me about Brandon Miller too, it wasn't all the time, but just like the number of contests he ended up having around the basket too, which is constantly things he was doing on defense sold me. I know we're not on Brandon Miller anymore, but
no, but that's the thing. Like, Brandon Miller could be a culture changer in terms of, yo, you got to show up every day. Like, I'm working, you got to work too. So it doesn't, like, a lot of the stuff Brandon Miller did last year went by the wayside because Wemby was so awesome, and it may happen again this year. But, like, Brandon Miller is the number 1 pick in any other draft other than the one he was in, and the fact that the Charlotte Hornets ended up lucking into that is something that you take and run.
Well, I think they deserve credit for taking him too, because that wasn't a no-brainer. Like, if you have the number 1 pick, okay, it's Wemby, like, done deal. But you didn't have the number 1 pick, and there was an actual decision to make at number 2, and the decision they made was widely panned.
It was widely panned, but also it was because the guy who made that pick. Remember, that wasn't Mitchell call.
Was like, people considered, and there's no reason to again, it's been 1 year for Scoot. He dealt with injuries. There was a weird role in Portland, but he was billed as generational. Like, people thought he was going to be better than Ja Morant, basically. So, like, to pass on that, even though you have LaMelo, I think it takes a level of gall that in this case really worked out for them.
Yeah, and the one guy that's capable of doing that is the one that made the pick. It's Michael Jordan. Because, again, I think I told the story. Like, Michael said the pick was Miller and had said the pick was Miller for 2 weeks. And everybody, and come and find out, everybody signed off on it. Like, LaMelo signed off on it. Clifford signed off on it. Like, a lot of that.
LaMelo signed off on someone who doesn't, play his position. That shocks me.
Well, yes, but also at the same point, like, and I think we made this guy. I think we talked about this last year. My thing is, what if Scoot's just Stephon Marbury, like a very good, like, has a like super like first 5 years, and then the league figures him out, and he ends up eating Vaseline on a Ustream somewhere, like,
or saying that LeBron isn't on the same level as Kobe. I don't know if you saw that recently.
I've learned to ignore Stephon Marbury since 2009. I was like the NBA. I chose to ignore him after a certain point in time. I wish everybody else did.